Hi guys, welcome to Book Time. My name's Julia. Today I'm going to be doing a sort of like a wrap up of the books I've been reading recently. So mostly they're books I read during May, and I'm going to be doing it with little Harry here, so hopefully he doesn't wake up. And you'll probably hear him snuffling throughout this entire video. So I'm not using my microphone, which I normally do, because I feel like it will just pick up his snuffling. So hopefully it's not too echoey in here for you guys. So I'm just going to go through the books I read from my least favourite to the one I like the most. So the first one was actually a DNF, not because I didn't like it, just because I didn't like the format, which was audiobook, and I was listening to The Amber Spyglass by Philip Pullman, which, as I'm sure most of you know, is book 3 in the His Dark Materials trilogy, and I liked the story a lot, but it was just quite complicated to listen to on audiobook because mostly I listen to audiobooks in the car, and for various reasons I didn't get to listen to it. Like, there were sort of extended chunks of time where I didn't get to listen to it, and it made it quite hard to follow because it's quite a complicated story with lots of different threads. So I will return to it probably in hard copy or on my Kindle or something at some point. But for the moment I'm DNFing that audiobook. So that's the first one. And the second one was actually a book I finished in April, but I didn't include it in my April wrap-up because my April wrap-up mostly focused on Aussie April, and this is not by an Australian author, but it's Sealskin by Bristow, which came out through Orenda Books a couple of years ago. I'll find the date as usual. I haven't checked ahead of time, and I have to spend all this time flipping through the book. It was published in 2017, 2 years ago. I picked this up because I saw it at the bookstore, and it's about the Selkie myth, so the myth about the women who live inside of seals, and when they come onto the land they can like undo their seal skin and live on land, and they're supposed to be so beautiful that human men can't resist them. Anyway, one of my favourite books of all time, if not my favourite book of all time, is Margot Lanigan's Sea Hearts, which is uses the Selkie myth, I guess, to explore various ideas around feminism, and it's a really, really good book. So when I saw this one, which was also about the Selkies, I was like, oh my gosh, that's so awesome. I'll get it and read it. Unfortunately, this was a 1-star read for me. I don't even really know why I finished it. I think I just kept hoping it would get better or something would happen at the end to make it better, but it didn't. So the reason I gave this 1 star was not because of the writing style, which was quite nice and evocative, and it's set in a very small like seaside fishing village in Scotland. So it had quite a beautiful setting and the writing was quite evocative, but basically the gender politics were terrible. And so I'm going to tell you what happens. It's not really spoilers because it's not that kind of book, but basically the main character, who's this young guy, I think he's the narrator. Oh no, he's not the narrator, but it's all told from his perspective. As in it's in the third person, but it's all from his perspective. He sees 3 Selkies, like 3 women come out of their seal skins and dance on the beach. And basically he rapes one of them and then hides her seal skin so she can't transform back into a seal and go back to the ocean, and instead takes her home. And that happens in like the first few pages. And then turns out she's pregnant, and so he has to marry her basically and live with her. And anyway, the rest of the story is basically about them falling in love and her learning to love him, and it's really terrible, mostly because she doesn't talk. Like, she literally can't talk. She doesn't have a voice. She does learn to understand human language eventually, but literally nothing is told from her perspective. And so the whole time it's like, oh, maybe she's forgiven him. I think she's forgiven him. I think she loves him. And I'm like, what about exploring the trauma of rape and being ripped out of your home community and family and never being able to go back, and then being forced to live in this world that is completely other from your sort of native environment, I suppose. Anyway, yeah, I found the gender politics really troubling, and so I was hoping throughout the whole book that something would happen towards the end to sort of rectify it, but nothing did. They just had a happy marriage, and some stuff does happen at the end, but it doesn't, I won't tell you exactly what happens, but it doesn't fix the gender politics, which I thought were really terrible, and I found it very surprising that a book with that sort of storyline could be published in this day and age. And on the back, it's like, oh, it's such a wonderful story about forgiveness. I'm like, it doesn't even, it's just the man's perception of her forgiving him. It doesn't even have anything about whether she does forgive him, how she feels about it, whether she's physically injured, anything. Anyway, rant over, 1 star, I don't recommend it. The next, the next one I finished finally was The Town by Shaun Prescott, published by Brow Books, which is an Australian independent press. This was shortlisted for the Readings Prize for Australian Fiction last year, which is when I started reading it because I read the entire shortlist last year. Sorry if you can hear some banging in the background. My husband's putting some shelves together for the baby's clothes. So I started reading it then. For some reason, never finished it. Not because I didn't like it, just because that happens sometimes, that you get distracted by the books. This is a really weird book, very cool. So it's about a guy, I don't think he even has a name, like an unnamed narrator, who goes to a rural Australian country town. So it's not a super small town, it's probably more of a regional centre. It gave me the impression of Ballarat or Bendigo, if you're from Victoria and you know those towns, that sort of size. And he's writing a book about how towns are disappearing across the interior of Australia, or at least New South Wales, which is one of our states. And you get the impression at first that it's like a metaphorical disappearance because people are not living there anymore, they're migrating to the cities, the shops are all empty, you know, that sort of thing. But as it turns out, it also becomes a literal, so the town he's living in becomes a literal disappearance too, and all these weird voids, kind of holes, start appearing all over the town and people disappear into them and stuff. Anyway, it doesn't really have much of a plot line. That's basically what it's about. And it's about this guy trying to write a story about these type of towns. And on the one hand, I feel like it's a critique of sort of capitalism and the way that like chain and big box retail has sort of taken over small towns. So there's not really any local business anymore. It's all anonymous and impersonal and hard to connect. So it's sort of a critique of that, but it's also kind of, I felt like a love letter, or if not that, then it also felt this weird affection for like sitting in a suburban mall eating from a chain patisserie, or, you know, Baker's Delight or Michelle's Patisserie, which are the types of shops you find in Australian malls. Like local suburban shopping centres, I should say, not like big malls. Anyway, kind of hard to describe, and it's just a really interesting book, and I felt like he did really nail the feeling of these towns, like some elements of these towns. But at the same time, I felt like it was quite a philosophical book in a lot of ways, and I feel like it was sort of something maybe he wanted to write an essay about, but then found that hard, so chose to write a novel about it, which is something similar to what the protagonist says, actually. And because of that, it made it quite hard, like it made the narration quite impersonal and quite hard to connect with, which may have been the point. But yeah, I think that was why it took me so long to finish it, because it wasn't something I personally connected with. It was more of it had sort of this philosophical edge, which did make me like it, and means I probably will reread it because I have been thinking about it a lot and would want to get back into it or get back into sections of it, but it probably would not be to everyone's taste, I would say. But if you want a very strange book with a very interesting writing style and a very interesting insight into some parts of Australian life, then this is a really cool book, and well done to Brow Books for publishing it, because Brow Books are really good at publishing very unusual fiction that probably or may not have been taken on by a more mainstream publisher. And I know that Jacqueline over at 6 Minutes for Me has done a spotlight video on Brow Book, so I'll link that down below because that gives quite a good overview of the type of stuff they've published so far. So there was that one. What were the other ones? Oh, actually, I forgot to talk about, and which I won't talk about in great detail because I did a whole video on it, was Normal People by Sally Rooney, which I gave 3 stars. I didn't actually love it. I didn't hate it. I just didn't love it as much as everyone else seems to, and I found that rather strange. So I made a video talking about why. Not like a rant video, it was more a video asking you guys, like, what am I missing? You know, these are the things I struggled with. Are they things you struggled with? Or, like, am I missing some major element to this novel that everyone else seems to get and I don't? As it turns out, I think it was just not to my taste. So I'll link my video on that down below without going into the detail now. Another one I won't go into too much detail about was Stan Grant's Talking to My Country, which I ended up giving maybe 4 or 5, probably 4 stars. Maybe 5. Like, it's a really good book in any case, and I talked about this in my Aussie April wrap-up because I had read nearly all of it during April, and it was part of my Aussie April TBR, so I'll link that video down below if you want to know more about this. Stan Grant is a journalist. He's also an Indigenous man, and this is about his views on race and how race functions in our country and where Australia might be able to go from where we are now in terms of race relations with Indigenous Australians. It's a really good book. I really recommend it. I'll link the other video down below. Probably my favourite book of the month was, well, Stan Grant's was really good. But my favourite, that's a non-fiction, obviously, like, very serious and quite upsetting. In terms of easy, fun, happy reads, definitely Greenglass House by Kate Milford, which is the first in the Greenglass House series. This was super fun. It's set in Canada, I think, or in the very, I think it's set in Canada or the very north of America anyway. And it's kind of like a middle grade mystery, I suppose, and it's about this guy, this little kid, Milo, I think he's 11 or 12, and his friend, Meddy, she's about the same age, and his parents own this hotel, this inn called Greenglass House, and the family and Meddy's family who work at the hotel with Milo's parents and also a bunch of guests all get trapped in the house during a snowstorm over Christmas for about a week. And during that week, it's really cool. It's a really good, like, interesting, fun and page-turning story considering it's completely set in this one house the whole time. And all the guests have something strange going on, and it's all related to the history of the house and Milo's history and Meddy's history, and there's like robbery and interesting backstories. It's also about kind of the magic of storytelling because all the guests take turns like telling stories from their own lives or from their own family history, and then those stories end up, Milo and Meddy work out that those stories sometimes have clues to what's going on and why all these guests are here at this particular time and what they're looking for. Anyway, I found it really, really fun. And it's also got other great themes in it. Like, it has, like, the character development is really nice, and, certain characters learn kindness and forgiveness and not in an overly done way, but just these little moments. I was like, that's really cool, and that would be really good to chat. Like, if my kids were reading this, it would be a really good starting point for, like, okay, so if something happened to you, how would you respond in that situation? Also, Milo, the main character, is adopted. And so part of the story is him kind of working through some feelings around what it means to be adopted. Obviously, like, he really loves his adoptive parents, who are the only parents he's ever known. So he works through a whole bunch of stuff, which I thought was really sensitively and well done as well. So I really can't wait to read the next ones. I've got them all on my shelf ready to go. So that's all the books I've got to talk about today. Let me know what you guys are reading. All right, guys, thanks for watching, and we'll chat next time. Bye.